In commercial centers throughout the city, the road to recovery will most likely be paved with readjustments or even permanent changes at Greater Grove Hall Main Streets. Ideas for that process were taking shape even in early March before the shutdowns were ordered by state and city officials. To share some of the recommendations for businesses is the organization's executive director, Ed Gaskin. Thank you very much for being with us, Ed.
Thank you, sir.
And I want to fast forward to where we are right now. How is it with businesses in Greater Grove Hall?
Well, very briefly, I'll just try to do a summary. So when the first shutdown started happening, there almost wasn't an effect. In other words, like when the sports teams stopped playing or the schools shut down, those didn't really have an impact because we weren't getting a lot of travel and tourism dollars coming to Grove Hall. The construction, there's not the same kind of construction in Grove Hall like there is in the Seaport. There's not a lot of college students like there is, etc. So at first we were almost like isolated from what had happened around us because nobody was doing business with us anyway. And then when the governor ordered the shutdown of all the non-essential services, that's when we really felt it. So then all my barbershops, beauty salons, nail salons, some of the bodegas, I even had a liquor store closed down.
You had a pot shop that just opened too, right?
Yeah, so the cannabis store was closed. So that was just like a noticeable difference. At that point, the impact was almost, it was so visual. So not only were the streets empty, but you could go, let's say like at 2 o'clock on a Wednesday, and every business would have the gates down just like it was on a Sunday morning or Sunday night. It was like everything was closed. So obviously, if nobody's open, nobody's making any money.
Well, there are two challenges for businesses, and one of them is how to move back to reopening in a safe way. But the other thing is to get enough money to not go under. I want to talk about the money with you because you've been working on that even more recently with a coalition to help make sure the local businesses get the benefits of aid from the federal government. What are you trying to accomplish?
Well, let me talk about that in two parts. So the first thing was, as you notice, there was like a blizzard of grant programs, loan programs, all kinds of people who wanted to be helpful from the foundations, business community. And my first issue was all of the resources were all in English. And like in my district, about 40% of the businesses are Dominican or they're Spanish speaking. Or you have immigrant businesses that English isn't their first language, etc. So at first what I was trying to do is I was trying to get things like the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, some of the banks, some of the whatever. I even went to the city council and I said, the city of Boston's own Office of Economic Development website is supposed to have all these resources. They're only in English. And like John Barrow's updates were only in English. All the resource guides are only in English. And I said, somebody has to do something. So I'm like just trying frantically to try to get somebody to make this more accessible to the wider community. So as you know, Boston, whether you're in some places like in Brighton, it might be Russian. If you're in Fields Corner, it might be Vietnamese, Chinatown. So I decided you can't exclude all these different groups from all the resources for all these businesses that need to survive. Well, I don't know, maybe like 2 weeks ago, I had got a call from Glenn Lloyd at Eastern Bank, and he said, "Hey, there's a group of us getting together. It's the Mass Equity PPP initiative," and it said we're going to try to help these small businesses get access to the federal PPP program, and basically this is what we need to do. And I was like in, and so what they had done is they had gotten 5 banks. I can't name all 5 of them off the top of my head, but I just remember, Eastern was one, Berkshire Bank was one, Baycoast was one, and there was 2 more. And it was like the who's who of grassroots organizations, whether it was LISC and Mass Growth Capital, Beckma was there, like literally Latinx, like anybody that works in this space was part of this coalition. And the idea was to, at first it was trying to get the best customers through because we were under the impression that all the money would run out on the first day. So as there was a second day and a third day, we tried to expand the outreach and get more businesses into the program. So eventually they got over 400 businesses, applications, people they were able to process. etc. And I just think it was a phenomenal success because it sort of filled a gap that existed in the financing community, and it was something that nobody else could have done. Instead of, no, I don't want to say they couldn't have done it, they weren't doing it. So it wasn't going to be done by the SBA. It wasn't being done by any of the other municipalities. And so, like I said, it was like everybody coming together because we all knew that it was important for the community to be able to get its, even, I don't even want to say share, just get some of the dollars out of the federal program.
Well, one stumbling block with that program, at least earlier, was that a business needed to have a pretty solid relationship with a lender even before the pandemic to really benefit from it. Has anything changed with that?
No, so what happened basically is almost by, the Sugun said from Beckma, they wanted to get the money out fast, but they didn't necessarily want to get it out fairly. So if you chose banks as a distribution channel, you already had a lot of structural problems in the first place. For instance, you already have all the unbanked people. And so, like when people on the personal side, banks might make some kind of accommodations like first-time home buyer courses, secured credit cards, and things like that. There's no such thing on the commercial thing. You're either there or you're not there. And so you had all these people that either didn't have a relationship, they didn't have a credit relationship or like a credit card or a loan or business relationship. But even if they did, what all the research showed is that they were too low of a priority. So a larger bank had a commercial lender would focus on its large commercial customers, either because A, as an amenity or customer service to those large customers, or B, because it costs basically the same amount of money to process a $100 million loan as it does for a $10,000 loan. There's the same set of documents. And so what the banks did is they prioritized the larger loans because they were focusing on maximizing the loan origination fees and the profits. And some of the loans, although it might be counterintuitive, if you're a small barbershop or whatever, and you say, I just need a $5,000 loan, it's even harder to get because the bank might have a minimum loan size, $20,000, $50,000. So it doesn't even want to deal with you on good times because you're too small to process. And so, yes, you're right. You needed the existing relationship. You needed, if you were larger, that was even better. And again, where your relationship was. So as the research started showing, the larger banks, let's say Bank of America, Wells Fargo, they had a much better advantage in the system than a small community bank or a credit card or a credit union. And so even where you banked, if you had a relationship with a community bank, you were at a disadvantage. The difference also was because there was already more demand than there was supply, the banks didn't really have any incentive to try to do outreach. So they had no need to try to come out to, let's say, people like in Grove Hall and try to encourage them to apply for a loan like this because there was already more demand than they needed. The other thing is that language was a barrier, as I mentioned earlier. So language was a problem, technical assistance was a problem. So like on my side, I would get information. I had CPAs, lawyers, bankers, other kinds of trade associations explaining, how to fill out the paperwork, what process to go to, answering, questions and answer sessions. And again, almost all of that was only in English. I'd only seen one of those that was in Spanish. And so what you do is you have language as a barrier, you have getting the technical assistance as a barrier, who you bank with as a barrier, your size is a barrier. And so at the end of the day, it shouldn't be surprised that, like way over 90% of all that money went to larger businesses. And as I said, it's probably going to go down in history as the largest transfer of wealth from one group to another. So if you think about it, it was $2.3 trillion the first time around. And even on the second time when they did when they were doing the second round, I think they only allowed like $30 billion for minority and small businesses. So I think that, I think it's one of the largest wealth transfers we're ever going to see.
And, you talk about history, it sounds like to me we've gone from the old days of out and out redlining to passive disinvestment. So how do you get around that?
Well, I do think that it was In other words, whether that was the intention, that was the impact. And so it could have been red lighting, but there wasn't. They didn't need to have that much intentionality, because the structure or the institutional framework was already. In other words, what you did is you took a system that already had disparities as part of it. And so, for example, I think even in 2019, during the good times, only 3% of all the SBA loans went to blacks anyway. And that's during the good times. So now during a crisis, it was obviously going to be much less than that.
And I want to ask you about one other possible disparity, maybe. There are businesses in main streets around Boston that are surviving because they're able to deliver, mainly food. What about Grove Hall? I mean, I know chains are making money with delivery, but how about these independent small businesses? Are they able to get in there and do it?
So that was sort of the advantage and disadvantage. So food businesses in Grove Hall, we had, again, if you want to talk about Greater Grove Hall, we had Merengue as a restaurant, but we didn't really have a lot of sit-down restaurants. And we didn't have a lot of people that had liquor license. We only had 2 liquor licenses in Grove Hall. And so most of the businesses were the pizza place, the Chinese place, the fried chicken place, things like that. So what we call those quick serve, almost like takeout type restaurants. So from a walk-in takeout type, they were okay. They were down because they didn't have as much foot traffic and commuter traffic coming up and down Blue Hill Avenue and Washington and Warren Street. But where they were hurt the most is a lot of them still never had websites, because they were just used to being neighborhood businesses. And so they didn't really have the online ordering. They weren't part of like a Uber Eats, Grubhub, DoorDash. They weren't part of those. And so they really weren't able to take advantage of those kind of programs. And even when, like when the mayor had a program to try to facilitate doing more businesses with those kind of restaurants, you had the same problem because they couldn't really participate because they didn't have the same kind of listings.
Yeah, I should finally mention, if people, and especially business people, want to get some help from the Main Streets program, is there a number where they can follow up with you?
Well, they can call me. First of all, the City of Boston's Office of Economic Development. So anybody that's in Boston can call that. They could probably call 311 and put through to that, and that would take them to the Boston Main Streets. If they want to talk to me in the Greater Grove Hall Main Streets, I can give you my number: 617-460-2326. And then what I can try to do is route you to where I think you would get the most help.